don't stop clapping, you won't hear from them, okay? So please be seated. You know, OC has hosted many guests and speakers over the years here in this auditorium and on this campus. And my belief is that never in history, not today, never in the future, will we ever have speakers and audiences that are in 100% sync on all things. But 100% agreement and 100% comfort is not the test. The test, the standard here at Oklahoma Christian, is to be kind and respectful and engage in honest and robust dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome once again Senator James Lankford and Secretary Pompeo.
Absolutely great to see everybody here. Thanks for coming out on this great afternoon to be able to be a part of this dialogue. This is a foreign policy conversation. We'll get a chance to check in with one of the great foreign policy minds on the planet. And so very grateful to be able to have Mike Pompeo here. Let me give you just a thumbnail, because some of you know him as Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State. But let me walk backwards. Mike Pompeo is actually just Susan's husband. Susan is right here, actually, and thanks for being here, Susan. That's the Susan of his life. Mike and Susan have one son, Nick. Let me walk you through a little bit of journey here. Mike went into a small school called West Point, one of the most difficult schools in the country to get into, to stay in, but ended up graduating first in his class at West Point. Left out there, served in the Army for multiple years in multiple different locations, came out of the Army, decided he was not done, decided to get a law degree at Harvard University, and was one of the editors of the Law Review, and then was full-time in business. Ran an aerospace company, ran an oil and gas company, and then some crazy person talked him into running for Congress in 2010. And out of Kansas, he ran for Congress, was elected. He was actually elected the same year that I was elected here for the 5th District of Oklahoma. He was elected in the 4th District of Kansas that exact same year. So that's when we met, as when we both came into Congress together, got a chance to shake hands, look at each other in the eyes, and say, what are we doing here? He was elected 4 times for the House of Representatives, but the 4th time he did not finish his term, because when he was elected that 4th time in the House of Representatives, a guy named Donald J. Trump asked him to be the director of CIA for a year, and then Donald Trump, I guess he could be a doctor if he wants to, Donald Trump then asked him to move over and to be the Secretary of State. He became the 70th Secretary of State for the United States. So served all 4 years in the Trump administration, and we had lots of time to be able to interact on a lot of different issues. So thanks for letting me give that little thumbnail on it to give some folks some background, because some folks just know you as Secretary of State and don't know the rest of the history from there. So my plan on this is to be able to just pepper you with questions. And I'm going to go through as many different continents as we can to be able to get some background. So you have a quick opening statements before I start peppering you with questions.
Not only this, thank you all for joining us here today. Bless you for being here. Bless you for being this special Christian place too. You should know that James and Cindy are great Christian friends of Susan and me. It was this love of Jesus that brought us even closer together. But frankly, as your senator, I can tell you, you are very blessed. He is one of the hardest working. I was joking. I have lots of friends. I wouldn't endorse them all for United States Senate. James is one of the hardest working men of faith with deep character who cares about America and represents Oklahoma and America in a way that makes him more than just one of 100. It makes him truly important. He is an American patriot of the highest order. And it was always great because we came in the last time we had to get Nancy Pelosi out, if I remember right.
Yeah.
And who believed we'd have to do it all again?
Always coming.
Yeah. When I got to work with Secretary of State when we were working on important issues all around the world, I could always count on James to give me great counsel, great wisdom, and I knew too that they were always praying for me. That mattered an awful lot to us, and I'm so happy to be here to support you today and make sure that you get 6 more years serving the good people.
veterans, number one question I get from everybody right now is, and I even had a guy yesterday that just randomly came up to me and said, your boy, meaning Donald Trump, your boy said he was going to leave Afghanistan as well. So don't blame Biden for all that's happening now, because it would have been exactly the same in what's happening in Afghanistan. Trump would have been there if Biden was there. Now, I tell you, in the last 48 hours, I've had that statement made to me multiple times, and we've got media folks that have caught us to make that immediate statement. You and I both know that's not true, but you actually know the plans and what was actually happening on the ground. So walk us through what you've seen and how painful that is, what we've seen of late, and kind of what was the plan, what's the difference.
So it's been hard to watch for me, and I'm confident for many of you too. And for those of you who have family members who served in the armed forces in Afghanistan, know that they are patriots. They kept us safe and secure for 20 years there. They did the Lord's work, and we did great work. We crushed Al-Qaeda in an important way, and I am personally, my family, and I know you all are thankful for each and every one of those service members. President Trump made a commitment to you. He said that we were going to wind down our presence in Afghanistan after 20 years. He made a demand of me. He said, we're going to do this, we're going to do this well, and we're going to do it in a way that makes sure that we are at a very low likelihood that we will ever be attacked from this place before. And so we began the process. I started the conversations with these butchers, these terrorists, the Taliban. We began to try to find a place, not where we could ever trust them, but where we could make clear American resolve that says, if you don't behave the way we want you to, if you threaten an American, if you kill an American, if you injure, if you scare an American, we're going to bring all of America's power against you. And that gave me the diplomatic space to begin to help draw down. We drew down from about 15,000 to a little over 2,000 by the time we left in January 20. And the entire time we were engaged in that. There was risk, right? We were reducing our footprint there. We didn't have a single American attack during that entire time. They knew that President Trump and Mike Pompeo were serious about protecting America and its interests. I say that not to brag, but fundamentally, this is what President Biden pulled out, right? This is the thing that he missed. He withdrew our military while there were still 10,000 civilians there. He closed down Bagram Air Force Base while we still needed the capacity. President Trump was very clear, we're going to get every stitch of equipment and every American civilian out of there, and then and only then will the conditions be possible that we might ultimately make that final drawdown. And President Biden just chose a different path. I can't prove it because on January 20th we left, but I can promise you this, we had a deep plan. We understood the risks of what you are seeing happen today, and I believe we had an understanding and an American military that would have prevented what we've seen these last 96 hours. It is a terrible embarrassment for the United States, and we all will have lost credibility. We're going to have to work hard to get that back.
Yeah, we are. And so just in the last week, all that's happened is rapid collapse. What we've seen is, as the Taliban break their quote-unquote agreement, which they have to keep on that, which we kept with our military might, as they have broken their agreement and coming closer, President Biden's been pulling his people closer and closer into the airport. And so it literally puts us on the run in that. In the meantime, we literally have members of the military with torches actually trying to cut through the metal in our MRAPs because we can't get them out anymore. And so we're leaving billions of dollars of equipment there that they're trying to destroy on the way out and leave the debris field in that spot. We've lost, as you mentioned, Bagram Air Force Base, and we walked away from it. That was the primary location that we could secure to be able to run that airfield, and we're down to one airfield, which is a commercial airfield. It's a dramatic shift, and it's very, very different than anything President Trump had done.
James, it's important to know the Taliban broke the agreement a few times while we were still in office. We didn't withdraw, we crushed them. Right? It wasn't for the sake of it, it was to make clear that we had to maintain deterrence and security as we got our kids home after 20 years. And President Trump was unambiguous that we had multiple missions and we had a plan to achieve each of those while we withdrew and put fear of our kids' lives at risk.
Many of you are brave people. There are 15,000 Americans that are still in Afghanistan right now. 15,000. So the media is not talking about a number that large, but that is the number. There are also thousands of people that work alongside our military. In the last 72 hours, we went out and talked to anyone who is an Afghanistan war veteran what they had said to me is, I'm brokenhearted when I'm watching. And the second thing they said is, there are translators and people that work alongside of us in the battlefield that are still there. Are they going to get out? Those are great people. We need to get them out. And that's something you work on a lot on the State Department side of this. Walk us through a little bit of those refugees that we're trying to be able to get out. What's their status?
So it's going to be incredibly difficult to get them out. I think last month this looks like Saigon. The pictures look a little similar. From my perspective, it looks more like Tehran, where we had Americans strapped behind enemy lines.
And you're talking Tehran
1979, when we had to get American diplomats out of our embassy there when the radical Islamists had for the first time held Americans. My guess is we're going to have some of those same struggles here. I was the State Department. We're the visa guys. I know any of you want to travel. You got to go State Department. Got to get your passport. We had worked diligently to identify those people to whom we had made real promises. And said, if you protect an American, if you help translate, if you keep us safe, we'll do everything we can to make sure that we take care of you. And we need to live up to that commitment. The world is watching America walk away from its commitment there. And we need to make sure that we deliver on that for every single person that we can.
Yeah, September 11th is coming again. It's a 20-year anniversary. And for 15-year-olds, it's a different kind of day than it is for 50-year-olds or 80-year-olds when we look at what happened on September 11th. The threat of radical Islamic terrorism is still out there. What does this mean of the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban mean for Al-Qaeda and for Islamic terrorism in the region and back to the United States?
Well, the way that this happened, I think, does increase risk. I hope it's only in a modest way. We have threats from radical Islamic terror in lots of places. You will all remember when President Trump took office in January of 17 that ISIS held a big chunk of Syria, a caliphate the size of the state of Delaware. We went after it. We were going to protect you. When this fellow, this Iranian guy, General Qasem Soleimani, was threatening Americans, we made that threat go away. This is something we're going to have to stay at. So when we see what's happening in Afghanistan today, I'm confident that there's ISIS folks, there are Al-Qaeda folks, there are other radical Islamists who are likely seeing this as an opportunity. I hope they don't misread the United States of America. I hope this administration is prepared to confront this. This isn't a good sign, but we have to all do everything we can. James, you have a position in the Senate where you can support this. We have to make sure that America is steeled and resolved, and we continue to do this. It doesn't take 50,000 soldiers on the ground each and every place to do this, but we have to deliver with clarity the fact that we're going to protect America from this threat, and I'm confident that we can do that. It just takes American leadership.
So can I go next door? Some people may not have the geography, if you haven't been in the region to be able to know, but literally the next door neighbor to Afghanistan is China. So tough neighborhood, to say the least, with a lot of areas and all the countries around Afghanistan. But China's a different threat to us, but they're a very serious threat. And I'm amazed at the number of national media people that I talk to and the number of business people that I talk to that think about China as China was 30 years ago, not as it is now. And I am astounded at the number of people that are still pulling back and going, well, China's just China, that's just the way that they are. But it's a very different moment for China now than what it was 30 years ago, and it's now accelerating human rights issues and threatening Taiwan, obviously already overtaking Hong Kong. What's happening in economic espionage that's happening around the world, the Belt and Road Initiative, their aggressive military zones around the world, and what's happening in the Western Hemisphere. Walk us through a little bit of where we are with China from a State Department perspective, foreign policy perspective, and where should we stand as Americans with China?
James, I always go back to when I was a young cadet. We looked at our adversaries, our enemies, through two lenses. Do they have the capability to take down our republic, and do they have the intention of doing so? There's only one place, there's only one party today, the Chinese Communist Party, that possesses both of those. That can truly have the ability to change our way of life here in the United States. If you listen, take my word for it, if you listen to their leader, the Chinese Communist Party's leader, Xi Jinping, he has talked about making America a vassal state. He talks about his country as the middle kingdom that controls, it has the capacity to control all. We see it with their use of their economic power. We saw when they sanctioned me and Susan, it was a lovely day in January, when that happened. So if you go to Beijing, you're not going to be able to take me with you, which is all good by me. The truth of the matter is that this is not political at all. Under Republicans and Democrat presidents for decades, we have just thought if we traded a little bit more with them, if we sold them a few more trinkets, we made a little more stuff there, that they wouldn't do harm to us, and that's simply not the case. Whether it's their cyber work, whether it's their spying right here in the United States of America, I had to close down the Chinese diplomatic presence in Houston, Texas, that were stealing secrets from our energy industry that matters an awful lot to the people of Oklahoma. They were stealing information from our medical centers. They were taking patients' information from Texas's best medical centers. This is the Chinese Communist Party that is inside the gates here in the United States. And we've got to figure out a way to confront it. President Trump, for the first time, was a president said enough. Right, so we responded seriously when they foisted this virus on our country as well. There is an awful lot of work that remains. I give the Biden administration credit. Their language, their rhetoric has been okay on this issue so far. But I can tell you the Chinese Communist Party believes that this is a nation in decline and that they have a weak president. And I fear that the actions that are required to be taken by our country under this leadership may well just not happen. I worry about China more than any other place.
And there's a lot of places.
And it's a crowded field.
Yeah, there's a lot of places. So I several years ago, ran into one of the WTO folks that actually negotiated the WTO agreement with China. And it was interesting, the dialogue back and forth. I mean, there were 5 people at the table making the final agreement to be able to give trade recognition to China. And again, the thought was at the time, if we trade with them more, they'll become more like us. They'll see how great capitalism is, and they'll become more like us. Now, several decades later, he looked me in the face and he said, we were wrong. We were wrong. And we set up an agreement that actually benefited them and destroyed us in the meantime, and we've got to have a reset. And for businesses and individuals that think China is just another nation out there, they're not just another nation. Walk us through a little bit of human rights issues that are happening in China right now, and why this has been such a passion for you. It's not just the economic issues, the espionage issues. It's this basic value of how we honor people that is not true with the Chinese Communist government.
Well, James, this was something that I had a real passion for. I worked on building out the ability for people all around the world to practice their faith. The central thesis of religious freedoms, making nations more prosperous and more secure, was something that the Trump administration worked really, really hard on. China is among the worst. If you are operating a house church inside of China, your life has gotten worse than Xi Jinping. If you want to practice any other faith, it's the same. Today, they hold 1 million Muslims in the western part of their country where they are conducting forced sterilizations. It reminds me of what happened in the 1930s in Germany. It is truly tragic. On my last day in office, I declared that what is taking place there is in fact genocide, something that the United States has not declared very often because of the horrors that are taking place there. And so we can see, well, by the way, we're about to send a bunch of our young people there to go compete in the Winter Olympics. I, for the life of me, cannot understand how a parent could in good faith send their child to China. We're having businessmen held, we're having people that simply aren't coming back from there. This is a regime that now is beginning to look like regimes that we know from history are tyrannical. They believe they are atheists, they believe deeply in their communist theory, and they believe that they can walk all over the United States of America. We're going to have to confront this. They declared economic war on America about 30 years ago and destroyed millions of jobs here in the Midwest, from Kansas, these places that I love. We're going to have to respond to this in a serious way. And for an awful long time, too many leaders, Democrat and Republican alike, simply walked away from that.
Yeah, that just can't happen anymore. But you mentioned this as well on religious liberty. You did something as a Secretary of State, no other Secretary of State's done.
I did a lot of things. No other
That's true, actually. Yeah, that's true. I'm not asking all of them, but I'm not sure all 70,000 employees at the State Department were excited your first day of work.
Yeah, it was a mixed bag, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Both of them that like me are with me now working for me. So that's all good.
But you did something called a ministerial on religious liberty. You literally pulled this unique American value that we take for granted, this right to be able to have religious liberty, to be able to practice any faith to be able to change your faith or to have no faith at all and still be a respected American. No one's required to have a faith, but no one's prevented from being able to have a faith and live that faith out or change their faith. That's not true in most of the world. And 250 year ago, that was a radical concept in the world. Everyone believed at the time the only way to keep peace in the country is that the people of the country had to have the same faith as the leader of the country. Otherwise, you'd never have peace in the country. You brought together nations from all over the world that still have that belief that the people of the country have to have the faith of the leader or the non-faith of the leader, or they suppress religious liberty and start a dialogue among people. In fact, I remember one of the ministerials who had asked me to come and speak at, I'm sitting next to Andrew Brunson, who was a pastor from the United States who was imprisoned in Turkey for well over a year, that you and I worked together to actually get out of Turkey and to be able to get him free. Now you've invited him to speak to all these other nations about religious freedom. Literally, he's a guy saying, I'm one of the guys that you imprisoned, okay? And let me tell you what it's all about. It was just a remarkable gathering of nations and of a concept. What brought you to be able to do that, and why did you pick that as a key value to move diplomacy?
It was crazy good, and you were an important part of getting Pastor Brunson home. It was one of the highlights of my time in the administration, for sure. We did a really good thing for a really noble human being around an important cause, and this idea that this was a pastor simply trying to practice his faith in this place. We felt like it was important for several reasons. One, we came at this with an understanding of our founding. It says this is in fact a Judeo-Christian nation, and that is important. It's been good for us. We think our religious freedom matters and has made us better, and so we believe that could make every country better. And so we wanted to export this idea, this concept. So we did. We brought leaders from all over the world. There were people, there were Christians, there were Jews, there were Muslims, there were Baha'i. I joked with my wife, I think I saw a couple of Wiccans. But we came around this idea that people are given this dignity from their creator, and if we would all accept that baseline premise, then a lot of the problems in the world that we have today, we could begin to address in a more serious way, in a more candid, more realistic way. The biggest human rights gathering ever held in your Department of State happened around this central idea of religious freedom. People wanted to come be part of this idea and this movement. It was truly glorious.
Well, it is one of the painful things as well to be able to look at now backwards, because that was set up to be an annual event and to be able to keep going on it. This past year, Sam Brownback, who you selected to be able to go to the International Religious Liberty for the State Department, actually pulled together a group on his own outside of the State Department, because it wasn't certain if this State Department would continue to elevate religious liberty.
It was actually pretty certain that they wouldn't.
Which again, it goes back to, this is not a partisan issue. Okay, you don't have Republican, Democrat, Muslim, Christian, Jews. It's a basic value of all people, you would think all Americans, to be able to protect the rights of religious liberty. But this administration, along with multiple other things, have just set those things aside.
I'd say one more thing that's really important about this issue. It was important for us to work on this abroad, but look where we're sitting today. We're this Christian college. We have this incredible privilege that we can come to this place and talk, and I'm sure there's people in here who just have a different view than I do. This is a wonderful, glorious thing, and we take it for granted. I will say, I worry about it here too. I hope you all will be just very mindful to protect this every place. We saw governments during this COVID virus close down our faith institutions inside of our own country. That is historically bad. That leads to down a slippery slope that I am deeply concerned about. And if we get it wrong here, James, in America, this place with this deep tradition, it will be lost for the world. And the world will become an even more dark place, populated by even more evil. And on our watch, that should not happen. So be vigorous in protecting your faith community here at home as well.
As we do. Basic principle that I live by and that I work to be able to govern by and our families by. I have a faith. I'm an evangelical Christian, born again, and grateful for the forgiveness that Jesus has put in my life, forgiveness of my many sins. Okay, and so very, very grateful for that kind of mercy and be able to walk that out. The Constitution protects my right to be able to not only have a faith, but to live my faith. And someone can't say, you're elected, so you need to take that faith off. Right? No, I don't. No, I can still continue to live that, but I also can protect the right of someone who has a different faith to be able to also practice their faith. It doesn't intimidate me diminished my ability to practice my faith for them to have a different faith. I tell folks that I'm a Southern Baptist. Southern Baptists were kicked out of all the good colonies. When we were still colonies, and we all ended up in Rhode Island. Providence, Rhode Island was actually started by a Baptist named Roger Williams to open up a place of the 13 colonies where there'd be religious liberty. We forget even in our colonies there wasn't religious liberty, but that kind of grew out of that time period in Providence, Rhode Island, and what's actually happened there. And their basic philosophy there was we want to protect the rights of every individual people in the faith. Okay, can I switch hemispheres with you?
Sure.
Western Hemisphere. Let's go north to south on this one. Yeah. So the long term, the United States has been very focused on the Western Hemisphere. We're going to engage in a very unique set of relationships with them. But we've got countries like Cuba and Venezuela and other countries that continue to feel struggle. We don't know what's happening with President Ortega anymore, and he seems to be taking the whole country backwards. There's a lot that's going on, but a lot that you're engaged in. But I want to raise one of them and let you take off north to south on the Western Hemisphere. If you want to even deal with our rowdy neighbor in Canada, you can whatever comes from that. But as we deal with the Western Hemisphere, I'd love to start with Cuba. The Trump administration was very focused on bringing freedom to Cuba and continue to be able to press this issue that what they were dealing with the Castro regime was destroying Cuba and had destroyed Cuba. This administration, when literally people are going to the street and risking their lives, seem to hesitate to go, I don't know if I want to oppose communism and socialism. They kind of seem like brethren rather than standing up for freedom. There was an enormous side-by-side shift to be able to see where we had been on the issue of Cuba and where this administration is on Cuba, where people are begging for freedom.
So there have been a handful of big disconnects, big shifts between the administrations. Cuba would be closest to home and one of the most stark contrasts. We believe that the Cuban people have the right to freedom. I regret so much that the uprising that took place now a handful of weeks ago didn't happen on our watch. I know precisely what would have happened. We had a plan for that very moment. And in fact, while I have to be a little careful as the former CIA director, anyway, I'll leave it at that. We were waiting for that moment. We would have responded with love and with support, and we had a half a dozen things that we were prepared to do near instantaneously. The first would have been to just speak clearly to the Cuban people and to the Cuban leadership, saying, don't you dare go after them in the streets. And to the Cuban people, you have every right to protest and demand your basic freedoms. This administration clutched out. They just have had a different view. They have tried to placate the regime and allow them to have money. We sanctioned the regime and stopped the cruise lines from being able to travel there. I know some of you love to go there. It's a beautiful place, I'm told. It's the right thing to do for the Cuban people that we impose real burdens on the administration. I, in the last week of my time as Secretary of State, declared Cuba state sponsor of terror. We've been after them for the trafficking, the narco trafficking that they're engaged in. We took every effort to impose real costs because it matters. This is close to home. We worked with Brazilians, the Chileans, the Ecuadorians. We made real progress in Peru. We had built up more free, more capitalist places. And then we had a bad turn of events in Argentina, frankly, where that country went backwards. But we knew that the people close to home, these people closest to us, look, our first foreign policy achievement, frankly, was a trade agreement with the Canadians, right? With that agreement between Canada and the United States and Mexico. All good work that created jobs here in the United States. So we have to get it right close to home, or we risk not being able to do the good work we need to do to secure freedom more broadly around the world as well.
Any other countries that really stick out to you when you think about Central and South America that you need to be aware of?
We fought the good fight for the people of Venezuela. We supported Juan Guaido as the rightful president there. We have built out infrastructure around that to try and help the Venezuelan people be successful. This is the largest net out migration on a percentage basis in any country not run by war. Maduro is so bad that he's now lost, I think it's 15 or 18% of his population that has fled to Chile, Peru, and to Colombia. We have every need to make sure that the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians don't have capabilities inside of Venezuela, and it's the Cubans that survive the linchpin, and that is why we fought so hard to get Cuba headed in the right direction. We were on the cusp in those places, never got quite across the finish line.
A little different issue that I want to dip into, but it deals a lot with the Western Hemisphere. Places like Venezuela. Venezuela's been propped up by their oil for a long time. And if quite frankly, the Russians, as you know well, have had this deal with the currency with them based on oil and such like that. Oil and gas have been a great tool of diplomacy, and it's fascinating to me how fast Democrats have run away from this. When Hillary Clinton was in the State Department at the time was helping other nations learn how to frack for natural gas, knowing that that was a tool of diplomacy for the United States, a demonstration of our power. The export of natural gas has been a tool of diplomacy. This State Department seems to be rapidly blowing that up, and not only that, Biden is blocking the pipeline from Canada and from Montana, which were clearly terrified of Canada apparently, but then releasing a pipeline that's going from Russia to Germany, when the second customer, that if Russia didn't provide the natural gas to Germany, it would have been the United States providing the natural gas to Germany. So this whole issue of energy has been a big deal. You used to run an energy company as well. You know these issues well. What about energy diplomacy?
I did. I had an operation in Ratliff City, Oklahoma, for all those of you from Ratliff City. Yeah. And I spent a fair amount of time in Edmond as well, which is where our partner's office was. Look, this will surprise some of you. I don't recall a meeting with the foreign minister, prime minister, or president where energy wasn't at or near the top of their agenda, the thing that they wanted to talk about. It didn't matter if it was Nigeria, right? They've got to put electricity in the homes of 100 million people. If you're talking to the Eastern Europeans, they do not want to count on Russia for their energy. They want it to come from America, so they want pipelines and LNG terminals so they can get energy from here. If you're in Asia, they are entirely energy independent, and they don't want to count on the Middle East. They want to count on a democracy that will deliver them safe, affordable, clean, abundant energy. This administration, literally the first person to represent the United States of America for this administration in both China and Russia wasn't the Secretary of State, it wasn't the President, it was John Kerry, the climate czar. This is upending things that matter. It's enormously wealth accreted to the United States, great jobs here in Kansas and Oklahoma and Pennsylvania, from North Dakota, for energy industry. That's fantastically important. But it has huge national security implications. And I had this tool, James, in my pocket, which was American energy. And we were able to get lots of these countries to do lots of things that were in our security interest, because I could offer them a great company from Oklahoma to deliver them safe, affordable natural gas, moved out of an American port. And these folks are just throwing it away. The fact that they're now begging, this administration is now begging the Russians and the Saudis to produce more oil while shutting down our energy industry at home is incomprehensible to us.
So one of the coolest days that I had in Washington, D.C. Last year was sitting on the lawn at the White House, watching two Arab nations and the Prime Minister of Israel sign the Abraham Accords. And to watch that historic moment, to realize it's been decades since there has been a peace agreement between an Arab nation and Israel. And President Trump, in his last year, led by you, your diplomacy, and others around your purview, signed 4 peace agreements with Arab nations and with Israel. So for those 5 nations in the structure of the Abraham Accords, many of you have heard of that, the Abraham Accords also had your pet statement in it. I recognize your handiwork immediately when I saw the opening paragraph of the Abraham Accords talks about the issue of religious liberty. Now think about that. We're talking about Arab nations making an agreement talking about the value of religious liberty and protecting religious liberty and acknowledging those rights among their people and other nations, and then laying out an agenda for economic prosperity for everyone in the Middle East together. Completely unheard of to be able to do that. Just walk us through the Abraham Accords and how that came together and what that means to the future of the United States.
Boy, it's hard to know where exactly to begin, other than I was blessed to have a president that was prepared to break glass. That I worked for, who was prepared, I mean this in the best sense of, there were 40 years of American diplomacy in the Middle East that had said, if you can't solve the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, no good can come from this. And so previous Secretaries of State spent their life traveling from Ramallah in the West Bank to Jerusalem, back and forth, and accomplished virtually nothing. we took an entirely different approach. We started with the central pillar of our Middle East policy being America's relationship with the State of Israel. And so you saw President Trump early on say, hey, I told the American people I was going to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Let's do it. And we did. I don't talk about private conversations much, but the President talked about this, so I'm going to just repeat it. We were sitting in a situation where I was actually the CIA director at the time. And the whole world said, if you do this, there'll be war. We did a bunch of work, really good work, to make sure that we could demonstrate to the President that wasn't likely to be the case. And so we gave him the capacity, the space to go make this important, this historic decision about how we would operate. We did the same thing in recognizing Israel's right to the Golan Heights. So we had just made clear that we were going to take this democracy, our friend in the Middle East, and we were going to be good, solid security partners with them. The second piece of it was, we came into office when the previous administration had given the Iranians a bunch of money and a pallets of cash. We knew this was tragic. Iran was at the root of most of the instability in the Middle East, and so we undid their deal, began to put real pressure on the Iranian regime as well. So that, I would describe that as a step 2 in the process. Each of those gave us enormous credibility with the Arab states. They said America is real, they are serious, they're going to support the democracy, they're going to go crush the Ayatollahs, and we gave them space to begin to build out a set of understandings that said we're no longer going to have as our central thesis the destruction of Israel. So the Iraqis, the Iranians, the Moroccans, the Sudanese, all ultimately came to recognize the State of Israel as the rightful Jewish homeland. And they are better off for that. And we literally changed the nature. There's more peace. There's less risk that we're going to have to send our kids to fight and risk their lives in that place now. I pray that we can continue to build out. There's still a number of countries that I know very much want to be part of that. It's going to still take American leadership to convince them to step across the line and make that important decision. But the central thesis that said we're going to build out, we're going to create the conditions for peace in the Middle East, drove these set of policies. We're just very blessed to have three really good outcomes in each of those special places.
Yeah, it's a lot of work to do. That's fine. You're right. You took a completely different approach than when you take it on those issues.
I remember what the New York Times said about our ideas. I remember exactly. I have in my pocket in case I run into it.
So, do you recall how many times the New York Times was right through the last 4 years?
I stopped reading it about a month in.
Yeah.
It was my cardiologist suggested that I stop reading it.
Yeah, not a terrible idea, to say the least. Mike, I have to tell you, a West Point grad, I can't imagine when you're at West Point, you were thinking, this is perfect preparation to run the State Department. Because people on the outside look at military might and diplomacy at two different ends of the perspective. But they're really not. They really go together, because diplomacy matters when you've got an aircraft carrier parked on somebody's coast.
Absolutely.
And so walk us through just a little bit for you stepping into the State Department. And as you step into the State Department, knowing 70,000 employees and most of them are not excited that you're there, and as you don't share the same philosophy within this, you walked in to be able to lead and to be able to guide. What did that look like for you?
So, who would believe that Mike would get this chance, right? I was serving as the CIA director at the time. Who would have thought that? Although Susan and I know full well what my best preparation for being the Secretary of State was. She and I taught 5th grade Sunday school for a number of years. And I was a deacon at the church, and so I could do church politics. I could surely do politics around the world.
If you were a deacon in church, does that mean you were standing outside smoking grumpy at everybody? The deacons in my church showed up, that's what they were like.
It was all of that, to be sure. Look, President Trump had given me this incredible opportunity to try to serve every day, to try and make America a little more secure. I literally started my day with a little prayer. I worked on the 7th floor when I was in Washington. I'd go up the elevator and I'd use that. It's an old elevator. You should also buy a new one for the new secretary. It took about 17 seconds to get up there. And I would bow my head and I would just center myself, knowing that I was going to need the Lord's wisdom every single day. And I was focused. I knew that if my team did it right, this gets to your point, if my team did it right, we'd have to deploy our men and women in uniform an awful lot less We needed them. We needed not only the capability that they bring, but we also needed them to know that America was serious about protecting the things that it found vital to its own interests. And I think people quickly came to see that President Trump and I were prepared to do those things. So it gave me a lot of capacity, a lot of leverage in these conversations to convince these countries that they wanted to be our friend, and it would be really bad for them if they chose to do otherwise. If they chose to be our adversary, we were going to make it very difficult for them. As a Secretary of State, as a diplomat, you have to have that. They have to know two things. They have to know that when you speak with them, you are speaking on behalf of the President of the United States. It's a great story. Secretary Baker, who had been Secretary of State, who came to see me just before, he said, Mike, if they find out that you are not speaking on behalf of the President of the United States, you're just a dude on vacation. And so I was always mindful to make sure that President Trump and I were in sync about how we were executing our diplomatic efforts around the world. And the second thing is you have to come from a nation with power. And America's power comes from its moral standing in the world, its credibility, its big economy, energy, an important component of that, and the knowledge that the American people are prepared to support leaders who are also prepared to protect those things that are most vital to each and every one.
So I'd say, Mike, I bump into people occasionally, not often, but I bump into people occasionally that'll say, we should just cut off all foreign aid, close down the State Department, and just do nothing on international policy. It'd be cheaper, we just save all that money on that. And as a conservative, as a very passionate conservative, that both of us are, we see the value of what's happening internationally, this value of dignity that we're bringing to people, but also the example that we set to the world. We'll talk about things, for instance, in Venezuela earlier. All of what's happening, the chaos around that region, will end up splashing on the United States. It already is. There's a tremendous number of individuals that are illegally crossing our southern border that are coming from Venezuela. And so there's a lot that's happening where our American policy and our day-to-day life, even here in this area, is affected by what's happening internationally. What would you say is a conservative principle for actually how we look up and see the world? Because some people would say, just the world needs to do the world's thing, we just need to do our thing.
Yeah, sadly, the world's not going to just let us do our thing. There are those that want to impose their will on us. We've talked about them. We talked about terrorism. We talked about the Chinese Communist Party's intentions. We shouldn't forget that the Russians would do us ill when they given the opportunity, believed that they could do so. But we took an approach that was very realistic. We literally, President Trump would remind me, Mike, don't ever pretend, right? See the world as it really is. So if there's a bad actor, acknowledge they're a bad actor, go address it. If there's a friend, we can build up that alliance, let's go do that. We put 80 countries together to help us take down ISIS. We built out a big coalition when the Iranians were acting out to patrol the Strait of Hormuz. We didn't do it with our own team. We didn't make our young kids go do that. We found friends and partners to go deliver that in the world. That's the finest of America, when we can do that. When we can work with friends and partners around the world, we can do our thing here at home. We're powerful enough that if a bad day happens, we can get to the right place and do the right thing to keep ourselves safe. But we are restrained in the way that we execute this. We've seen too often that we become a little too adventuresome and we find ourselves in difficult places that are incredibly hard to unwind from. We were always mindful that we didn't want to be part of that. So restrained, realistic foreign policy was the center of how we thought about it. And we always put America first.
We're about to wrap up, but I've got one more country, one more conversation, because you had the distinct non-privilege of sitting down with every bad actor in the world. That whenever it was like there's total chaos, bad situation, terrible human being, it was like, Mike, you got it.
I hit the road, yeah.
You got it. The president called you my Mike or something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
So he always called you my Mike, he's going to send you to be able to go over and do that. So you got to do that, which also meant you got to sit down with the president, affectionately called Rocket Man, multiple times.
Little Rocket Man.
Little Rocket Man.
Exactly.
Yeah. So give us a little bit of color of sitting down with Little Rocket Man.
My goodness. You know, what kids all keep us humble. One of my son's best lines was he saw a picture of me from the first time I met with Chairman Kim, and he wrote a note to his friends, attached the picture, and said, "I've seen that look before." when I was the CI director, the president asked me to go to North Korea to see Chairman Kim to begin to do the work to try to convince him to give up his nuclear weapons. That was at the center. You'll remember President Obama had told us this would be our greatest foreign policy challenge, and in fact it was. You'll recall at the beginning, it was pretty dodgy. The president was tweeting about my button is bigger than your button, and fire and fury, and there were missiles being launched. And so I had a chance to go there. I went to Easter, Good Friday of 2018, early in the morning was my first trip.
Happy Easter.
Yeah, happy Easter, and got back late Sunday night. None of you knew that I had gone to begin this set of conversations, to sit across the table from a human being that had killed tens of thousands of his own and who had returned, a young man named Otto Warmbier, who he had been holding only to have him die just shortly after he returned. It took all the steel that I could possibly muster, but I was on a mission the president had given me. We were able then to begin to piece together a set of understandings in the course of the first summit in Singapore in the summer of that year, in the summer of 2018. We got Chairman Kim to agree to give up his nuclear weapons. We weren't ultimately able to achieve that. On what was my second visit, it was probably my highlight of my time as Secretary of State, my personal highlight. It was the last meeting that I had with Chairman Kim before the president went to Singapore. And at about 4 o'clock that day, I had to be back in the air by 5. About 4 o'clock that day, I said to Chairman Kim, "You are still holding 3 Americans." And the president would have every expectation that those 3 Americans will get on my airplane when I leave in an hour. There was a lot of talk in a language I didn't understand on the other side. Chairman Kim got up from the table and pointed that the meeting was over. And we walked out. I got back to the airport and climbed up the steps, and my senior guy who was back at the plane, who hadn't gone in for the meeting, said, "Mr. Secretary, that they came with a white van a little bit ago, and 2 of our senior people went with them." And it wasn't another 15 or 20 minutes, and the white van pulls back onto the tarmac, and then pulls up to the foot of the steps. The door slides open, and my two State Department employees hopped out first, then a couple of North Korean guards, and then 3 Americans. It's still very emotional to me. We didn't know what their conditions were. We'd seen Otto Warmbier come back in very bad condition. And these 3 guys walk out of this thing, and I was just literally, it was as emotional a time as you can possibly imagine. I get the last part of the story. We get them on the plane. We come to conclude they're in pretty good shape, pretty good physical condition, and we start heading for Tokyo, where we had a second airplane, a medical airplane, that was going to fly them back to the States. And I get out of North Korean airspace, and I call the president. And I said, "Mr. President, my airplane's a little more crowded than when I left." And he said, I can't wait to see him. And I said, "Mr. President, we're planning on stopping in LA." He said, "No, you're coming to Joint Base Andrews. I want to welcome these Americans home." And you may remember there were 2 great moments from that homecoming for these men. It's often awesome that they got to see their families. I walked in, my plane landed about 5 minutes before theirs, and I walked in, and First Lady, Mrs. Trump, was there, and she says, "I've been Secretary of State for 2 weeks. And she said, "All right, what are you going to do next?" I believe my response was, "I got nothing, I'm done." But you know what was really special? If you watch the video of them coming off the plane, I was standing at the president and the First Lady went up into the airplane and spoke to them before they came down. And when they came down, he handed me this 3x5 card, and on it was a psalm. It was really quite something. These 3 Christian men were thanking America and the Lord for their safe return. And I will never forget that we need to be faithful to each of those 2 things, the Lord first and our country second. And when we get that right, then I'm convinced America will continue to be this very special, most exceptional nation.
Just returned back home. He's been in prison in Turkey. He's just been released. We're all seeing the Oval Office with his official welcome. the first thing he wanted to do was say, Mr. President, can I pray?
Yeah, it's remarkable.
Yeah, that's the first thing he wanted to do, was to be able to say, thanks to God, thanks to this great country, and let's try to be able to maintain that value in the days ahead. Mike, it is a joy to be able to sit and with you. I can pick your brain. We've left about 160 pages out, I think, so far today, but there's a lot to be able to talk about. For all of you that came, thank you for caring about where we are as a country. I have to tell you, I still meet a lot of people as I travel around the state, and I've literally been from all the way in far eastern Oklahoma and Stillwell, if you know where that is, to Guyman in the past 7 days. As I travel around the state, I meet people that are one of two things. Some people say, I'm mad, I'm not watching the news anymore, I'm checked out, I'm done. And I meet other people that are leaning in, that are saying, my country needs me, and they're engaging. This room is full of that second group that are saying, my country needs me, I'm leaning in. Thank you for not giving up on God's authority on what He's doing on this earth and for our great nation. Thank you.
Our senator